This panel was recorded Friday, March 19th, 2021, during the 15th Annual Public Administration Research Conference hosted by the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management at UCF. The panel is titled, Visions of a Sustainable Creative Village, An Urban Planner's Perspective. It is moderated by Dr. Luis Santiago of UCF.
Thanks for joining this panel. The title of our panel is Visions of a Sustainable Creative Village, an Urban Planner's Perspective. And first, I would like to begin by introducing the members of the panel. I'm Luis Santiago. I'm Associate Professor at the UCF Urban and Regional Planning Program. And with us is Katie Shannon, who is a Community Planner at VHB. Dr. Chia Yuan Yu, who is also Assistant Professor at the Urban and Regional Planning Program, and Owen Beich, who is an Adjunct Professor at UCF at the Urban and Regional Planning Program and Director of Economic and Real Estate Advisory Services at GAI. So that being said, I think I can start with my presentation, and it won't take 15 minutes. I think it will be shorter. As you probably or may not know, we have been trying to make sure that these presentations bridge the gap between academia and practitioners, and I think this panel will also attempt to do so. So just to begin, Creative Village is in downtown Orlando, and it encompasses various facilities, including education, mixed income, student housing, office and retail space, and green areas. So the panel is going to explore Creative Village from various optics, including professional urban planning, transportation, and economics. But my role will be to address the sustainability of Creative Village from a broader urban planning perspective or from an academic urban planning perspective. So I will try to cover 3 points rather quickly. Why pursue sustainability in creative cities in general? If so, what type of sustainability? What are the pitfalls of the traditional creative city? And how can we achieve a more fully realized creative city and village? So I always like to begin with this diagram, which is a planner's triangle presented by Scott Campbell in his 1996 paper, Green Cities, Growing Cities, Just Cities, and then later revised in 2016, because most planners are familiar with it. So I think it's a good starting point. But as you can see, he defines sustainability considering 3 main elements: equity, social justice, economic development, and environmental protection. And his argument is that to be sustainable, you should be somewhere inside this triangle. We don't know where, right? It depends on the weighted average of each of these elements, but you should be somewhere in there in order for you to be sustainable. So if we go to the UN, well, we see also a very broad definition of what sustainable is, even broader than the one you just saw that Scott Campbell presented, right? But we do see some common elements where you see no poverty, climate action, reducing inequalities, etc. It's still very broad, but there are some common elements between Scott Campbell's vision of sustainability and this UN vision, which is quite broad. So how does sustainable meet the creative city? I think in order to be able to do that, what I would like to do is just to begin with Act 1, which is the creative city, the creative economy, as a way to seek sustainable outcomes. And for that, I would like to just begin by mentioning Richard Florida's book, The Rise of the Creative Class, which actually is more than 20 years old now, where he actually indicated that if you want economic development, you should attract a creative sector to your city. And in order to be able to do that, then you must have these 3 T's in your city: technology, talent, and tolerance. If you have those, that's like a winning recipe, right? So this model was actually successful by many accounts, but certainly was a bit, I think, problematic in terms of social equity. And it was successful for some people, but it was not convenient for many people that lived in cities. And we'll see why. because actually nearly 16, 17 years later, he published the book, The New Urban Crisis, where he actually says, well, for urbanism, the urbanism for all is required to move us forward, must take shape around 7 pillars. And he mentions reforming zoning and building codes to the benefit of all, investing in infrastructure needed to spur density and clustering, limiting costly and inefficient sprawl, expanding the middle class by turning low-wage service jobs into family-supporting work, tackling concentrated poverty head-on by investing in people and places, engaging in a global effort to build stronger, more prosperous cities, empowering communities and enabling local leaders to strengthen their own economies, and coping with the challenges of the new urban crisis. And he mentions building more affordable rental housing in central locations. So, what would be Act 3? What would be one of these ways to achieve a more sustainable creative city? Well, one way would be through sustainable creative placemaking. And here I'll just make a quick reference to the book by Marcuson and Gadwa that was published in 2010, where they mentioned that the problem, of course, is American cities and small towns confronting these structural changes and residential uprooting, and that the solution would be revitalization by creative initiatives that animate places and spark economic development. And some of the payoffs then would be gains in livability, diversity, jobs, and income, as well as innovative products and services for the cultural industry. So this is actually one way in which you can achieve a more sustainable creative city. What makes creative placemaking unsustainable? Well, they did mention displaced communities of color, as well as displacing certain residents and small businesses, also displacing artists who face economic instability, a lack of affordable space, and having homogeneous environments. In terms of what would make creative placemaking sustainable, they actually mentioned existing neighborhood stakeholders, such as longtime residents, small businesses, public agencies as drivers of community development, and trying alternative models that support a culture of sufficiency through land trusts, co-op commons, increased protections and regulations for zoning, and more stringent community benefit agreements. So let's get back into the creative village, and I would just like to focus on 2 specific elements of the vision. One mentions that we are seeking a diverse mix of students, employees, and residents. Also, another component of the vision mentions that we're trying to promote Orlando's innovative spirit, rich cultural heritage, and diversity through artistic expression and cultural activities that connect people and communities. So clearly, there is a focus on diversity. Let's see if I can just move forward here. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So I think one way that we can seek a more sustainable creative village, and this doesn't necessarily mean financially feasible or financially viable, is connecting to Paramore. And I think one of the ways in which we can do that is looking at the Paramore Comprehensive Plan vision, which mentions re-envisioning the neighborhood in different ways, such as a healthy home for current and future residents, as a complete community, as a new mixed income housing with a public school and parks. And also, Creative Village seeks a strong connectivity to Paramore. This is something that is mentioned in the documents by public art as a way to accomplish that goal. But I think we can and should do more than just creative art, right? So I think if we look at the Paramore Comprehensive Plan, we see some strategic guidelines that I think would be helpful in this process. I would just like to focus on 2 of them, because I think these are the ones where perhaps we may need more help. One is to promote social and environmental justice, and the other one is to increase housing opportunities. So if we look at the promote social and environmental justice section, we see these very specific recommendations, and I would just like to focus on two of them. One of them is to support Project DTO recommendations addressing a scattered site housing program for the chronically homeless, including sites outside of the Paramore neighborhood, and evaluating all future community development projects and programs according to healthy community principles, including the creation of metrics to gauge success over time. If we look at increasing housing opportunities, we also see four very specific recommendations in the Paramore Plan. I would just like to focus on one of them. It says, develop a strong local infrastructure for preservation of affordable housing, particularly in proximity to SunRail stations, using tools such as transit-oriented development, land acquisition fund, land banks and land banking, and community land trusts, which I think is something that has already been done to a certain extent in Creative Village. So in conclusion, because I would like to leave more time to my fellow panelists, I made it short. So in conclusion, stakeholders at Creative Village have an opportunity to seek a more balanced sustainability by strengthening a social equity framework. The groundwork is there, the map is created, we already have the plans for Creative Village, for Paramore. We already have it, right? So UCF and the city have already begun this engagement process. Certainly has been stopped to a certain extent because of COVID, but it certainly should continue after COVID. And the city should decisively pursue the Paramore neighborhood plan, particularly the housing guidelines. And I think this would allow us to end up with more than just a financially feasible location, but a showcase of a sustainable, socially equitable creative village. So that's all I have to share with you. And thank you so much for listening. I think we'll have questions at the end, right? So I think now, Katie, continue.
Let me know if you see anything yet.
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right.
So whenever you're ready, Katie, I'll start your time.
Okay. You can go ahead and start it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to wow you with flashy images, but I am incredibly excited to be here today to talk about the parks and open space elements that have been proposed to be integrated throughout Creative Village, with a focus actually on the Central Park design, which my firm has actively been working on, and kind of take you on a journey of my experience with Creative Village and the downtown Orlando area, as well as some other citywide initiatives that are important to this effort. I am an alum of UCF. However, I did get my degree in planning from Rollins. And at the time, I actually had the pleasure of working on Creative Village as a graduate student and starting the visioning process. We took a trip to Portland, Oregon, and Craig Utzler himself, the master developer of Creative Village, actually led part of that summer course in which he started to lead and share some ideas on what he saw for the future of this redevelopment project, within the Paramore community. It started with, a very concrete, he's a true visionary, he loves big ideas, and fell in love with a lot of the wonderful urban places in and around Portland. But specifically, he took us on a tour of Portland's Pearl District, where we were introduced to some really incredible forms of placemaking and their connected systems of parks, which, was both humbling to be a part of, and I'm proud to say that it's been a part of an ethos that's carried on through the master plan, the adoption of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. And before I go on to the next slide, I actually kind of wanted to start with a candid conversation about the importance of park spaces and quality park spaces in our everyday lives, particularly in relationship to sustainability. But we know that parks and open spaces, they help to reduce the overall heat island effect in our urban environments. With adequate trees, we start to remove pollutants from the air. And honestly, trees themselves act as carbon sinks. They help to reduce overall GHG emissions being emitted into the atmosphere. Parks themselves reduce surrounding temperatures and help people to feel more comfortable in space. and provide, really crucial opportunities to improve overall community health and mental wellness in particular. An important statistic that I always like to point out is that just 10 minutes in an urban open space or like a woodland lawn, generally speaking, can really help tangibly reduce people's level of stress. And it allows us to feel more connected to our communities, to, the space, this earth that grounds us in space. And, they're particularly important for some of our most traditionally underserved or vulnerable populations. So I appreciate Liz's, attention to detail. I'm pointing out so some of the social services that need to be, paid more attention to within the community of Paramore in particular. But, in Florida, they definitely are that type of space that offers a reprieve from the hot sun. But I know that they're more importantly a place for social interaction and us to gather and create a true sense of identity. And I know as we've seen through the COVID pandemic, recently speaking, if we're looking at it in terms of resiliency, access to parks has proven to be absolutely critical to allow safe interaction between members of our communities. We've seen some parks and recs departments pointing out that they've seen an uptick in upwards of 400% of normal visitors coming that would go to the space post-COVID. And they really are an essential public health infrastructure that warrants our protection and future investment. And, fundamentally speaking, they also offer a return on investment for so many different reasons that I had kind of touched on earlier. But that being said, I'm going to kind of go through the journey of the development of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. So project history on this one, VHB was actually tapped to in early August 2015 to start to pull together some initial slides, really just start the visioning process of what the space could look like. But we were on site. I mean, this is in the center of what will be, the crowning jewel of Creative Village, their Central Park. But a lot of our site civil team was heavily involved at this time, helping with grading and drainage and pipes and infrastructure onto the ground. But we were invited in to just preliminarily speaking, even start the visioning process. And I know Craig was intimately aware of a lot of the really great things that were happening within our main streets in particular. And he was really intrigued by what was happening with a Main Street program in Audubon Park, which I actually I serve on the board now, which is really great. But he was particularly, fell in love with, I don't know if you guys have been to Curran Drive, but Audubon Park sits on Curran Drive, which honestly is not the most stellar of urban environment. But, in spite of that, it's a 5-lane arterial through programming and signature events and really an understanding of a community movement in, promoting sustainability and community resilience initiatives, things like urban gardening, composting. There's just a really strong sense of identity that he saw, could really be brought and would help to bring people to Creative Village. Moving forward, of course, we got an amendment to go ahead based off of the preliminary work that we did, start the development of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan in 2018, which really was, fundamentally based on so many existing guidelines and documents that were already adopted for Creative Village in particular. And we started the conceptual plan and final, actually now construction plans for Creative Village, or Central Park, which will be opening up in fall of 2021. I got confirmation that is still true, that they're still on time to do that. But I did kind of want to give a little bit of an update on or an overview of some of those existing documents that, of course, were reviewed, and a part of the ethos and guidelines of these documents can be seen within all of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. But the first, of course, is the Paramore Comprehensive Neighborhood Plan, which was largely founded on 10 healthy community design principles, a few of which I've highlighted here just to point to those principles that normally, parks or new activated spaces can really help to support. So, it's one of those fundamental opportunities to invest in people, not cars. It itself is an economic driver. It draws people to a space. I know when I visit any numerous cities, usually one of those first things I go to are, the world-renowned public parks. Another foundational plan, of course, is the ever-evolving community action plan with the Greenworks Department. These people work incredibly hard to, really tack on some performance metrics and put the city of Orlando to the test and start to change the ways and change things for the better. But a few of the existing adopted goals that I highlighted here that are in the community action plan that, the development of park space within Creative Village will help to achieve is, an increase in tree canopy. Of course, an easy one to tag into is that, we want to ensure that all of our residents are within walking distance of a park. And this as an urban infill project is certainly providing that. But, there's a myriad of other health benefits related to the future development of this park space as well. And last but not least, I know Luis touched on the technology component within, what it takes to build sustainable communities. But, the city's always been on the cutting edge and recently adopted what is called the Future Ready City Master Plan, which, is setting the foundation and, again, putting goals and performance metrics behind what it means to support our communities with the integration of technology in the public realm. So it can be anything from, integrating smart lighting interior to buildings or exterior out on our roads. It's integrating Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi into public spaces so that we can start to solve the problem of the digital divide. But crucial to all this is it actually does support social vibrancy, like through the integration of technology and differing programs that, are bolstered by technology. We can really start to create better communities. So I did want to share just a couple of the initial slides that were pulled together in that initial visioning session. So embarking on this, it's a really fun project, and there are so many great spaces to analyze and start to think of as analogs for what this could be. But we really wanted to hone in on specific themes that are very important to public art spaces and more or less capture why people go to public spaces. So it could be going there just to relax, to take a break from a hard day. Some people actually, I know I feel this way when I'm in park spaces. I almost feel like a kid again, like I'm rekindling a love for what it is to play. But, a lot of great spaces are also bringing in urban agricultural components. So they're cultivating new food opportunities, which is, a really sustainable endeavor. But initially speaking, we kind of came up with these few words. Well, not so few, there's quite a few words that more or less describe parks and tried to imbue some of the images that we selected to go eventually into the Parks and Open Space Master Plan, more or less aligning with those key themes identified. So throughout this process, we've really tried to pay an homage to the really great things happening in Orlando. This image in particular, which the word engage meant that, there's active learning environment. So this is a picture of that OUC installation, which has become pretty popular these days anymore at the Immerse Festival. But it offers, and it's a solar installation, offers an educational component behind it. And, pre-COVID, you can see it was very popular. So integration of technology can also be an integration of an educational outreach component as well. So like I said, we tried to bring in pictures of things happening around the city. You can see I left Juice Bikes in, which I know are no longer around, but this puts it in context of when we were working on this. But just again, trying to highlight other existing initiatives, Creative City, Art and Odd Spaces, tapping into the local talented artists that we have that might be able to start to provide those creative moments, tapping into the wonderful resource that is our creative students in digital media, whatever it might be. But all of this eventually did go into the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. So one of the things that Craig was really key on was, and I guess a fundamental understanding of the type of interim uses that could be put into place. Interim uses are something that, of course, is a short-term installation, but there are some still vacant parcels in Creative Village, and it's growing and being developed by leaps and bounds. But what are we doing to activate those spaces as an interim means to, bring people again to Creative Village? And some of these ideas is kind of a long bucket list here was, but host a bike valet or host a movie night, or again, hosting an art installation, tapping into the culinary program at UCF. What does it mean to have like a barbecue cookout and invite people out? But it's just one of those attractors to space and means of engaging people in those kind of opportunities. These are just a few more of the images that were considered at the time as well. So all of this understanding did happen, and we were analyzing various parks for all of their attributes and the things they bring to the table. But the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is something that is phased over a series of 3 phases. Not all the parks will be put in one day, but we started to pay particular attention to certain parks that might be in that initial phase 1, before everything's built out. So it's a really fabulous example from Boston of called the La Nandia Park, where they, have a wide variety of uses. Food trucks come out. They have fun kid-like games, bocce ball, and all sorts of really great things. Was kind of an inspiration for this first phase. And then Wynwood, a very wonderful example of integrating the creative talent of the local population, but also hosting pop-up events and those, Insta-worthy moments. And then again, always wanting to tap into and provide an economic driver for our local talent. So a couple of examples of murals throughout Orlando. And phase 2, this is where we start to see a little bit more of those structural elements come in. So, what is an interim use really starts to become more permanent. We also look to Lake Dot in this example, which, has the wonderful water amenity that really does provide an opportunity to kind of showcase sustainability within the built environment. So this is Tanner Springs in Portland, where the park itself is actually a means of, it's a wetland reclamation project or restoration project. Sorry. But they also, used repurposed materials. This is actually an old railroad that became this wonderful sculptural wall that, again, is something that people gravitate towards. Very similar. This is another park in China that has a lot of those same natural eco functions too. And then phase 3, of course, is where we envision Central Park being honestly a world-class park, something similar to the High Line in Manhattan and or even Millennium Park in Chicago. So really an emblem of the city. I know right now Lake Eola is that emblem for us. When we think about Orlando, we think about the fountain or the swan, but hopefully we can bring that type of branding to Creative Village, and honestly, they have created a beautiful brand already. So these are just a couple of the pages from the adopted Parks and Open Space Master Plan that I wanted to highlight. This is the master plan itself. So there were 10 parks identified throughout the development program. Some near the UCF site. Number 1 there in the middle is the Central Park site. But you can see kind of wedged in some of these spaces are other opportunities to provide more urban environments as well, and a couple interim uses. So at this time we did hone in and alter some of those key themes or pillars a little bit and start to tag purpose and meaning behind the choices that would be made in the future. It also included a massive inventory of the parks and open spaces within the downtown core. Greg really wanted to understand, is that my 5 minutes? Sorry, I'm not seeing the chat. Just told me no when I have 5 minutes.
Your 5 minutes is actually up. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're just.
Oh, I'm done.
Yeah. Well, if you could wrap up.
Yes. Okay, I'll go through this. It included an inventory of parks and open spaces, just trying to understand what elements are already in the downtown core that we wouldn't want to be redundant and put in Creative Village, and better understand what gaps also exist that need to happen in Creative Village. This is the phasing plan that I had already mentioned. A couple of the pages where we start to provide descriptions of what all of the 10 different parks would look like. And then I am at the end of the presentation. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the renderings for the Central Park site in particular. It went through, of course, numerous iterations through the creative process. This is where, of course, it will be eventually, live and be within the development. A couple of images of what it would look like. But this is the final development program with really 5 key areas. The first is called the Cloud. So this sits at the north side up near Amelia. It has actually a higher elevation. So there's this wonderful structural element or trellis where people can sit and actually get views of downtown Orlando, kind of a passive element. Of course, the Great Lawn, where any numerous activities can actually take place. On the, I guess, the west side on Terry Avenue, there's a proposed promenade, which might be a place where people can eat and gather. And then last but not least, the final element I wanted to share is more of a natural element, kind of closer to UCF, which is right now called the Grove. Again, more of a gathering space, but trying to be a little bit more intimate. With that, that's it. And I apologize for going over.
Just by a minute, you're fine. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Louis knew. Thank you. And I will stop sharing.
Okay, so next will be Chia Yuan Yu.
Hey, thank you for the great presentation, Louis and Katie. So can everyone see my screen, my PowerPoint? All right, fantastic. So I appreciate everyone. I think for your time to join the session, and appreciate Louis for organizing this panel. And I think Louis touched base a little bit about transit-oriented development around the downtown area. I think most of the city around the downtown area, they usually implement some transit-oriented development. So today I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the transit accessibility, and also it's very important for us to promote the equitable access for everyone. So, right. So before I started to talk about some of the cases of the transportation equity, I wanted to talk first to define the transportation equity first. So I think the preference of the transportation equity vary by neighborhood region and individual experience. But in general, transportation equity means that the transportation decisions are made with deep and meaningful community input that's lead to transportation networks and land use structures that support health and well-being, even environmental sustainability, and equitable access to resources and opportunities. So for the equal access to transit, I think this is important to design a transit station that allows everyone has the access to station. So transit-oriented development definitely is our approach and concept to promote economic development, and also can in turn increase nearby property values by improving transportation accessibility and offering more livable environment. And the positive effect of transit-oriented development on property value and tax revenues are widely viewed as an economic benefit and are key to justifying the high cost of building transit infrastructure. So, however, the construction of transit station could bring the change for the surrounding neighborhoods. So here, just a little bit of definition of the neighborhood change. So this kind of neighborhood change occurs when there are dynamic movements of people due to the infrastructure investment. So government policies and markets act as a critical role in causing neighborhood changes by investing public or private capital. And this mechanism somewhat benefits some communities and unfortunately disadvantage other neighborhoods. So in this case, investment in station areas cause lower status neighborhood change to higher status ones. So in this case, low-income households which will benefit from additional accessibility to transit station provided by upgraded transit are forced to move by rising rent level and housing costs. But furthermore, also, because minority low-income households tend to own fewer cars and use transit more often, the displacement effect may undermine its promise of increased of increasing transit ridership. So therefore, only high and middle income residents live near transit station and have the easy access to the station. So here, just want to give you, because I think the Creative Village just started, I think, just a couple of years. So here, I just want to show you one of the research perspectives that they collect the longitudinal data set, try to explore the relationship between light rail station, transit stations, and the changes of neighborhood characteristics. They collect the longitudinal data set across 14 U.S. urbanized areas. So for the independent variables, the outcome is the neighborhood change. They consider several aspects, but primarily focus on the socio-demographic, socio-economic variables, such as they create the neighborhood change index, and also they consider race, the change in percentage of total population who are white, non-Hispanic, and also consider the education level, the change in percentage of population age 25 or over, who have at least a 4-year college degree. And also they consider change in median household income around the transit stations, and also the change in percentage of poverty rate. And of course, also consider some other very important outcome like the change in population density, and also the change in percentage of all commuters who use public transit, to see whether there's any changes in terms of transit ridership, and also the change in percentage of all commuters who use other travel modes than private operated vehicle. And because I mentioned that they use a longitudinal data set, so they are also using some socioeconomic characteristics as the beginning year to predict for this kind of change. They also consider the population density, median income, percentage of non-Hispanic white, and also education level, poverty rate, and also they also consider some housing characteristics around the transit station, like the percentage of renter occupied, the median rent level, and also the median home price. So the result shows that because they collect all this information in 14 urbanized area. So the result highlights the effort by local and regional planners for more inclusive development can maximize the benefit of the transit-oriented development. And they focus on the discount result can vary depending on the local and the regional context in the planning effort. Like I mentioned, I just because they started 14 areas, so I just briefly mentioned some of them here. So like in San Francisco and Denver, so the result shows that high rail station areas have become relatively occupied by whiter, richer, and better educated residents. But in Portland, Los Angeles, and Buffalo, station areas are characterized by having relatively less white and educated population, as well as having relatively greater poverty rate. Change the slide. So if we go detail, for instance, like Portland is often studied region that focuses on developing around light rail stations and try to maintain applicable transit-oriented development plans. So the Portland Metropolitan Regional Council Metro has a specific transit-oriented development plan or program for transportation-related development. So it's mainly targeted developers, asking to provide incentives to develop in an economically feasible way around the transit stations. So they try to foster new transit-oriented housing that is definitely affordable for the workforce. But also, the interesting finding is that the San Francisco Bay Area transit-oriented affordable housing, they also provide some funding to develop affordable housing, especially near transit line. But however, if we're looking at the regional context or local context. These two cities are completely different. So in San Francisco, the regional overall high housing prices and real estate market may still dominate any active effort and strongly influence their gentrification related to the residential changes. So even though they have some affordable housing funding to provide some affordable housing for low-income populations, but because of the high housing price, so still the low-income population still cannot afford the housing not nearby the transit lines. So here, just I want to briefly conclude a little bit about like some of the policies. I think the Orlando, the creative village, because it's still growing. So definitely we can consider, especially we have several apartments nearby the UCF downtown campus just being developed and just allow the students to apply to live. So definitely we need to account for the housing affordability nearby the transit station area and also improve access to and from affordable housing. So like it's very important to actively pursue transit-oriented development, but also with a strong affordability requirement. And the second, transit operations and the capital project should support employment in low-income communities and even communities of color. So use transit operations and capital projects to create local community-based workforce development opportunities. And the last but not least is definitely we need to incorporate equity goals into the agency plan and also the equity-driven processes into the agency planning and policy decisions. Definitely require leadership and investment from multiple government stakeholder groups. So I think this here is conclude my presentation. I just provide some overview of the potential issue that in Orlando downtown area about the equitable access to the transit station. Thank you.
Thank you. You are about 3 minutes early, so the last presenter can start early if they'd like.
I'm trying to find my PowerPoint now. And here it is. Okay. Right. Yeah, can everybody see where I am?
Yes.
Got me? Am I on?
Yes. You have 15 minutes starting now.
Great. Thank you. So these presentations have been very, very informative. I want to try to touch on something a little bit different and quickly click through a few things that others have talked about. I want to talk about sustainability and the Campbell's Triangle for a moment. I want to talk a little bit more about Katie's vision because, as she explained, the vision wasn't fully actualized. I mean, we've had some hiccups along the way, and that it then has affected the timing and the scale. And we now have an actual plan which deviates from the types of things that were introduced originally. And all of those things together affect the economic vitality of the project in ways that haven't really been discussed this afternoon. So we have Louise who talked about the Campbell's Triangle, and we embraced that in planning, certainly. And the three pillars that we pay a lot of attention to in planning pedagogy are the environmental and the social. We don't really pay in our classroom experiences a lot to the economics. And in fact, a lot of planners, at least in my opinion, are somewhat less exposed to what true economic theory and economic function really what those are all about. And so this presentation is to call your attention to that element and perhaps make an appeal for why that needs to be a stronger part of the curriculum. When I look at the environmental, the social, and the economic, there is a concept called the Pareto frontier and economic efficiency. And in simple terms, that I think, tie very nicely to the triangle are Pareto says very simply, if we try to make society better off, we should push it to be better off so that everyone's position is enhanced until one person is less better off. So the idea is we raise all without lowering anybody. And that frontier space is the area between maximum sustainability and something that might be less than the maximum sustainability, the Pareto frontier. At the same time, as a consultant like Katie, I'm mindful of another triangle, what I call the consultant's triangle, which isn't a part of this presentation. And the consultant's triangle basically talks to speed, price, and quality. Pick two. You can't always be speedy, you can't always be price efficient, and you can't always produce quality. You have your choice of two. And arguably, the Pareto frontier in function is a lot like that. You're not going to have perfect environmental sustainability, perfect social sustainability, and perfect economic sustainability. So in the original notion is we had UCF was to be a destination for all students, visitors, and residents of downtown. The shared vision was at the same time that we would have this gateway area that would connect to Parramore, the heritage Parramore community, the broader downtown, and of course, inside the village itself, we would have a variety of spaces that would allow us to have that connection. And Katie has talked about a lot of those, and she shared these images. All of this, as she pointed out, occurred in 2015 with this being the ultimate build-out vision, which was very, very high intensity and very dense. The original program called to have almost 2 million square feet of taxable land with almost 600,000 square feet of academic educational space, 1.2 million square feet of office space, and a variety of hotel rooms and apartments. Many of the apartments and a small part of the academic space exist today. It was predicated around this idea of a 15-minute walk shed. And this 15-minute walk shed is important because it is the basin that captures most of the economic vitality, as well as potentially threatens some of the sustainability of the adjacent neighborhoods if those three legs of the triangle are not fully balanced. This was the original phasing that Katie talked about. And we were hired at the same time that Katie's firm was to do an economic evaluation that was presented to the Board of Governors that I hope became a part of the decision to proceed with the campus. But when we made our presentations in early 2015, the expectation was that we would be well along in 2018 with phase 4, starting in July of 2017. We never really believed that could happen. And we pushed it all the way out as far as these dates that you see in the lower graphic, with the later date being 2031. One thing that I don't believe people fully appreciate is how big the UCF campus downtown was positioned to be. I want to call your attention to several of these numbers. You can see very small hours here showing up or down. These are the major college campuses in the United States with a population in 2020 of 18,000 down to around 15,000 on the far right. The UCF campus was supposed to have 14,000. So consequently, at 14,000 students, perhaps somewhat larger, we were in this range of spaces here. So this one campus, one single campus by itself, would have placed this university and its enrollment in the top 250 schools in the country. I want you to feature that a school that literally would have been developed in a period of 5 years, according to the original vision, would have moved from a zero position as a campus by itself to one of the 250 largest universities in the country. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. So A university that size spends off lots of money in terms of human capital, knowledge, attractiveness, some local households, some benefits to government and to local businesses, largely within this watershed. The basic economic impact model is very simple. You have direct impacts, which is the UCF campus activity investment, indirect impacts, which is the university making purchases from local suppliers. And then we have so-called induced impacts, which are all the consumer spending that is stimulated from the wages that are created by the direct and the indirect. These fall into two categories: fiscal, which are property taxes, sales taxes, and so on. Whoops. Well, did I skip? I lost a slide. And they also extend into economic impacts, which are jobs, employment, and demand for final output. In overly simple terms, what this model is illustrating is the local version of gross domestic product. We can't model the local situation perfectly, but we are saying that UCF in this situation is the bottom leg of the triangle in the Campbell function. And if we borrow the consultant's triangle, it's the one that's the most economically efficient, and it may or may not support the other two in their entirety. But inside that bubble, this is what the gross domestic product looks like. You hear a lot about the multiplier effect. This one had a multiplier effect of about 1.07, which I don't think is on the graph. The multiplier comes from succeeding rounds of spending, very large when it begins, increasingly or decreasing in size in subsequent rounds, till eventually it all slips away and becomes nothing. Multiplier, very misunderstood. It's kind of a black box based on a massive national economy, but it'd be very rare to see a multiplier of anything much higher than 2. 3 would be extraordinary, and if you see anything beyond 3, it's probably an invented number, frankly. So we put all of that development program that you saw inside an in-plan model so that we could test what would be all the economics of the construction, how the benefits would flow to new or existing businesses, all of this to get at this idea of total downstream discovery and economic impact. Implemented over several years, concluding in 2018, at the time we did this, based on this 590,000 square feet, the impacts would have been absolutely enormous. Going back to the Pareto frontier for a moment, there is a corollary of the Pareto frontier that says very simply is that 80% of the consequences or 80% of the results result from 20% of the consequences, of the inputs. So even if we start to scale back the actual results that we're seeing on the campus, we still have an amazing set of numbers. So we modeled this not with 14,000 or 23,000 students, but with 7,700 students, 165,000 square feet, and a significantly lower amount of construction value. And the bottom line is we were able to show potential income earned by different groups here. Oops, lost my slide. Of almost 2,100 jobs and $130 million in income, and gross domestic product inside our bubble of $310 million. Extraordinary numbers, reduced to income per person of $62,000 per person. This is on the construction side. The top 10 employers in the construction category clearly are, the construction industry itself and a lot of related construction suppliers, and related industries. In the ongoing side, which is, we're up and running, students are enrolling. We have employment of about 2,100 people, income of 90 million, and income per employee of 44,000. I'm often asked, why is this number so much lower than this set of numbers? And there are several reasons. Much of the employment that comes out of this stems from contract labor, not necessarily direct labor. I mean, a lot of people that we see at the university, including the security guards, for example, and the maintenance people, don't really work at the university. Many do, some do not. And that affects how all of these things are treated inside this model. Not surprisingly, when we go to the major employers, colleges, university, professional schools, we do have a slightly higher level of employment. It went from $62,000 per person to almost $64,000, which is what you expect. But because of the nature of our economy, the secondary jobs are largely service jobs. So even though we ourselves at a university pay pretty well, the secondary impacts can only be tied to the structure of the existing economy. It is what it is. We could spend hours talking about these numbers and the theories, and I'm always pleased to do that. But I think that there are 5 or 6 takeaways that I wanted to emphasize. Our goal here from the beginning has been a combination at UCF, has been a combination of aspirational, which is what you've heard Louise, Katie, and who I talked about. But it's been largely economically actualized. And despite the delays, despite the vision of 15 to 20,000 students, or whatever the initially conceived number, the impacts, in my mind, remain largely intact. And that would be the economic impacts. If the stress on the environment and gentrification still exists, potentially it could only get worse. I'd say by any measure, the impacts are substantial when viewed from an economic lens. But one of the things that I think is important to point out is that one thing that made these impacts realizable was this very unusual partnership that stemmed from a combination of governmental and institutional factors, partnerships, and locations. So if we go back to that 15-minute walk shed, there are many interlocking and moving parts that if you release the same amount of money at the existing suburban campus, the main campus, the impacts actually would not be as high. So, location does affect the totality of what you're seeing. And I also think it's worth remembering that the downtown campus, viewed just as an institution in itself, at its build-out condition of 15 to 20,000 students, would rank it as a major campus or academic institution entirely on its own. Forget the fact that it'd be a part of a 60,000 plus student enrollment at the other campus. That's it for me. And thank you very much for being here. And a special thanks to Justin for allowing me to technically collect. Thank you, Justin.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. I think we had some really thoughtful and informative presentations. And I think we have about a half hour for questions. Is that right, Brittany? Yes.
That's correct. We have until 4:00.
Okay, so I think Leilani has some questions. Leilani, would you rather ask them verbally? I see there's something in the chat, but.
Yeah, sorry. It looks like a whole bunch of stuff, but it was really just 2 questions. The first question was just, I guess this is a question that I came up with when I was listening to Katie's presentation, and then I got out of the meeting and I had to come back, so I may have missed some of her presentation, but I was just saying like certain areas near Creative Village, like around like Lake Dot and underneath the I-4 bridges and other places near Creative Village, they have a visible homeless population. And when planning for public parks and public spaces, do the planners take into account unique variables, or maybe this is not a unique variable to Creative Village, but other areas on like the West Coast, but do they take into account that variable specific to that location when they're looking to build? And when these public parks and spaces are created, do they see an increase or decrease in homeless congregation around these spaces?
I can try to unpackage that one. It's a very vital question. And okay. I agree with you that we do see higher concentrations of visible homelessness within and around Creative Village, especially as it's been sitting vacant for so long. It definitely allows people to find it to be familiar turf for them without, eyes on the street, the typical Jane Jacobs, community model of having people there to help in those situations. I will say in this instance, at least with Creative Village, it's more an approach from a reliance on existing city initiatives and social services programs. I know the mayor, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, but joined a Housing First initiative, which is a regional collaboration to help homelessness population. And, there are numerous homelessness hubs located throughout the city. One of them, I believe, is off of Central Avenue. But with that, the sad thing is with development approvals, those kind of spaces are seen as a little taboo. Like no one wants that use in their backyard. And I'll give an example of something that I thought was really innovative that actually came before the Municipal Planning Board in 2019, just northwest of the Creative Village site near the Magic Mall off of Colonial. There's a vacant hotel that a developer wanted to convert into short-term rental opportunities for, and it actually included employment, education. Valencia, I guess, is coming in and using the existing commercial kitchen to utilize that space to provide that backbone that doesn't, release people back in without some sort of job security in the future. And I mean, of course, people come out to speak against something like that. And I personally think that it's just such a tremendous opportunity, wonderful use of space to provide those kind of social services. And I think that we'll hopefully see more of that going on. It's definitely a goal within the Future Ready City plan to, use available data and resources available to us to hopefully decrease and provide support for the homeless population. And while I have not looked into statistics related to an increase in homeless populations with, great urban spaces, I will say personally, when I think about some of the best parks I've been to, Savannah is a really great example. There is an increase in the homelessness that I see, but it's almost like they're supported. It's not obtrusive, I guess, if that's even the right word. It just feels kind of natural. But I know Portland in particular, they have relied on some nonprofits to make these portable sanitation stations that can be brought to varying parks around town, just to at least, again, provide some support for them to take a shower. And I know I don't know if you've ever heard of Clean the World. They're based here in Orlando, but they're a worldwide nonprofit that takes soap and other sanitation, elements, items that can be repackaged and repurposed to send all around the world for communities who need that. And they were pursuing a similar sanitation station model to bring here locally to Orlando, which would be really great. But it's a tough question. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk
and I wasn't really meaning to catch you off guard. I was really curious because I know that they want they want to build public spaces and public parks, and people want to come and utilize them. But then there is the element of, you see homeless people, and it's not a crime to be homeless, of course, but then there are like certain, like I'm a woman, and, I do want to go to the park, but maybe I'm scared, and trying to see if I can get around that. and because we do see, like, specifically in that area, that there is a lot of, like, homeless congregation around there. And I do understand what you were saying, bringing into it the social services element. And I forgot the lady's name over the city of Orlando who works closely with Buddy Dyer, but she's really good with trying to, like, help with the everything home. I forgot her name, but anyways.
Lisa Portelli.
Yes, Lisa. Yes, she's she's so awesome and really great. Lisa, yes, that's her. The social services lady. But you answered my questions. I just was curious, like, from a planning perspective.
No, it's a very, very good question. Thank you for bringing it up. I didn't even think about it going into today's presentation.
Well, yeah, and another thing too, like under the I-4 bridges, there's a lot of, like, homeless people that live under there, and then within, like, the next 3 or 4 years, the city of Orlando and FDOT, they're going to recreate those spaces underneath the I-4 bridges into, like, parklets and, like, basketball courts and open gathering spaces where they can have, like, music and food trucks and stuff like that. And so thinking about it now, like, when I drive under, there's a lot of people that, they sleep under there, and what's going to happen, when they go and, beautify underneath the I-4 bridges, that I was just curious of, like, well, they'll still be there, or will they go find somewhere else where it's quiet to sleep, So
true.
And then the second question I had was maybe more, like, transportation related. So I don't know if it's for Katie or someone else, but I was just saying, as millions of dollars are going to be poured into Creative Village in the Paramore area, that they have already poured into the area and are going to continue to pour into the area. It's only evident that they're going to have more developments that will, come into the community. People that are going to want to come in and develop and build certain spaces for certain uses. And, within the planning process of those developments, do they take into account long-term effects that it may have, on neighborhood streets, and like the capacity that they'll bring into the area if they can continue to, like, if they continue to build, like, so fast?
Anyone would like to address that question on transportation?
I have an example. I have one little example. Okay. There's a proposed development that's right there on, like, Westmoreland and Colonial, that they're going before the municipal planning board in April. A development group who wants to, so it's right there on Westland and Colonial. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the area, but they want to build some type of space where it's, they said it's like medium mixed use, where there's, like, 75 living spaces. Like, they had this whole big plan or whatever. And the road that I live on, which is called Concord, it's within, like, it's right close to Creative Village. A lot of my neighbors were kind of against that because they felt that, Colonial is already backed up as it is, and Westmoreland is already backed up. And so they were just thinking about, do they take into account just the traffic implications and the road capacity that would be added onto their neighboring streets? These streets where, like, their kids, bike on and people scooter on. Do they take that into consideration?
Yeah, I think I can jump in to address this kind of concern. I think that's a really great concern question about the road capacity. But I think if you're looking at, because usually when you do the planning, we definitely will consider the population projection in this area in the future. in the future. So we based on this, we definitely come up with some corresponding plan for the road capacity. But I think downtown is a unique animal. Is like because usually if you're looking at the downtown area in all the U.S. cities, so they design the grid-like networks, street networks. So it's they try to promote is complete kind of a street design. So like it's street is not only for the vehicle, but also for the pedestrians and the cyclists. So I think in the Creative Village, you can see definitely we designed the wide sidewalks and the bike lane nearby the road. And also we try to, I think just the road, I don't remember the name of the road, but just in front of the UCF downtown campus, they only designed 2 lanes road and with the limited speed limit. So I think that's one of the concepts to create the lower speed limit and increase the lower the speed limit to address the concern for the cyclists and the pedestrians. So encourage more walkable and the cyclist behavior and to provide a friendly environment. Because if we only increase the road capacity, road expansion, that's somehow demonstrate that that's, when you increase to certain capacity, it's definitely what cause the one day is what caused the traffic volume, such congestion issue again. So a lot of ideas we try to promote in downtown area is not only focus on the vehicle itself, but also try to promote the public transportation. Like I think in downtown area, they provide the free links, the transit, and also try to, provide the wide sidewalks to encourage you to walk more and to bike more to access the Creative Village area. So I think that's the main key, the main design in the Creative Village, and also a lot of the cities that in the downtown area, they try to promote this kind of approach to address the road capacity issue. So I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about complete streets and trying to get people into the mind frame of, cars is not the only one way to get somewhere. There's other modes as well. I thank you for your time and thank you for the explanation. I can go back to some of my neighbors and give them some of the information that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Leilani, for those questions. We have a small crowd, but it's a quality crowd. So, Sarah, Andrew, or Rachel, do you have any questions for us? Any of the remaining?
Sorry, I've been running around, but I just wanted to say that this is amazing, and I've been sharing the information as much as I can, like people throughout the commentary. I work with several nonprofits.
Can anyone hear her?
I can't hear her.
I don't think any of us can hear you.
We're missing you. Yes. We would like to hear you.
Sorry.
Yep, that's gonna work.
Technology is an issue. Ever since I joined this morning, I knew it was so important to get this information out to attend the sessions. So I live in New Orleans and I volunteer with the Greater New Orleans Caring Collective. They provide meal services free of charge from donations to the impoverished people affected by coronavirus. And we also just started a program called Help NOLA Vaccinate. I'm a master's of public health. So I have gotten the information out to several organizations around here, nonprofits, and there's a clinic called Crescent Care that focuses on HIV prevention and is doing some work for coronavirus vaccinations and HIV positive people living in New Orleans. So Also got it out to the Louisiana Department of Health, public health schools all over in our area. So, and our local community colleges biology club. So hopefully they'll be joining in. But thank you so much for all that you all do. And we're definitely really appreciative for the chance to join and learn.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and joining us. We appreciate that, definitely. So I think Sarah is here. Sarah, do you have a question for us?
Hi, everyone. No, I don't have any questions, but I really enjoyed listening to everyone's presentation. And I think everyone's doing a wonderful job. And I'm happy that I could be a part of this session and just listen to everyone's presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I think everyone has participated who is in the audience. So I would have tons of questions for each of the panelists, of course, but this is not why we're here. So I really would like to catch up with you later on and just talk about this some more, because I see many connections and I see many areas where we could explore perhaps issues and conduct some interesting research. So I hope we can continue this discussion after this panel today. But is there anything that the panelists, anything that you would like to add that you didn't have a chance to before we finish this session?
So what I would add is, aside from thanking everybody for being here, is specific to my presentation, and perhaps actually specific to everybody's presentation. If we don't get back in the classroom, we're not going to experience any of the things we talked about. We're not going to experience the use of the livable spaces that Katie was talking about. Certainly no need for transit-oriented development to service who, service whom, to service whom. We're not going to get any of the economic impact because nobody's going to be walking within inside that 15-mile walk shed. So truly, what we outlined today was a lot of aspirational stuff, none of which can be realized without actual people. And I think the corollary of that, I think, is worth talking about too for one moment, from an economics point of view. If the situation we find ourselves in continues to be maintained, the whole notion of what's economic impact, I don't even want to try to address what others have discussed. The whole notion of what's economic impact and how these models work is garbage. They would all need to be totally recalibrated because spending follow, money will still be spent, but it'll follow different pathways and conduits, so that the indirect induced results will be far different. So we may be on the cusp of having to rethink a lot of things that we call normal. And use of the word normal is probably parochial.
Any final words, Katie or Chia-Yuan?
I just want to thank everyone for your time. Yeah, it's interesting. I love talking about this project in particular just because of, the involvement as a student and then how it evolved into actually getting to work on it as a professional in the field. And then the educational component, my prior job was as an art educator, and I love everything that UCF has brought to the downtown core and Valencia. I always forget, but it's really great to see a new foundation of education for the Paramore community, as well as the K-8. It's just at the core of everything, and it's only got a brighter future. But we do need to get over the hump of.
Yes, and we will. Chia-Yuan, any final words? No, you're good. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining this panel. Leilani, Rachel, Sarah, Brittany for helping us with the technical stuff appreciate it. And thank you especially to the panelists for preparing for this and really just providing some wonderful insight into Creative Village. So I think we're done. Yeah, early.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, you guys
have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Happy Friday. Yeah.
Bye.